We're back. Olive has settled down and is now napping peacefully over there. Um, so yeah, I freshly caffeinated. I have to cover up one word on my little mug, but I thought this was hilarious. What now with the T-Rex with like the little grippy things? T-Rex finally won in the hand department. But anyhow, hello and welcome back. So we are in the middle of chapter 13 on prejudice, and we're picking up on where we left off with the last one. Let me go ahead and throw up the PowerPoint so you can see it. I just wanted to share my mug. I know it's infantile. But anyhow, the effects of prejudice on the victim. How does this affect people in terms of if you are the person who is a victim of prejudice, which all of us have been at some point in our lives for one reason or another, whether it's because you're a man or because you're a woman or because you are brown, black, white, in between, or whatever it is, you've probably been discriminated against at some point. So, what are some ways that prejudice affects that victim of prejudice? Um, well, a lot of times people internalize that and think that they are somehow less of a person because of it, which they shouldn't. Um, but it's almost impossible not to do sometimes. Because it is an unfair thing. It's not a rational reflection of what anyone is like. Um, Sometimes people will reappropriate whatever part of negativity you're a part of and take pride in that and use it as motivation to keep going or to make something of themselves or to raise up the group in whatever way possible. Um, And interesting, they use that word pride there at the end. The whole pride movement for non-straight folk is very much one of these things where people are owning their identity and being proud of it, where they have been pretty discriminated against in the past. Um, so yeah, some people take it negatively, some people take that and turn it on its head. People have greatly varied reactions. Usually it does take a little bit of a toll on someone over time, though. Um, One of the more subtle ways that prejudice affects us is in something called the self-fulfilling prophecy. We've talked about this before. It's not a new concept necessarily. Cover up my mug. Um, it's when someone treats you in a way that you can't help but react to. So if we meet someone and they are from a stereotype group, we probably will treat them in a way that's somewhat consistent with that stereotype. And then they can't help but react to the way that you are treating them. So if person A, um, let me use an example of a overweight person in a doctor's office because that one is coming easily to mind at the moment. Um, but if a doctor comes into the room and has an overweight person who's having some joint pain, the doctor may be a bit dismissive of that joint pain and mention their weight without taking them very seriously in terms of could it be something other than just being overweight? And that person who is being judged by said doctor in the room will probably get a little defensive or maybe withdraw from the conversation. And so the doctor doesn't have a good sense because this person is not advocating for themselves and their pain of what's going on. And it turns out to be a bad encounter. So the self-fulfilling prophecy is when someone reacts in a situation because other people are expecting them to act a certain way. In a nutshell, it's a process of being treated and then responding in a way kind of consistent with the stereotype or any belief, honestly. Um, looking again at job interviews, but this time in-person job interviews, um, looking at body language and interaction between the interviewer and the interviewee It looks like when, your average white guy goes in for a job interview, they look more calm, cool, relaxed, and they're treated that way as well, as if like you're a competent person in here for an interview. Um, And the black candidates for or African American candidates for that job often do look more tense, uptight, and are more likely to fumble, possibly because of that pressure that's on them. Um, so yeah. In a second experiment, they trained people to act differently. So this time the focus was more on the person doing the interviewing. And they trained them how to treat someone who is seen as competent and white by the stereotype, or to treat someone as being black, and therefore somehow less on something as a result. And when the trained interviewers treated white people with the black stereotype, the white people did not do as well on that interview. This is something called stereotype threat as well. We're going to get into that detail in a bit. But yes, that's the big study talking about the self-fulfilling prophecy. And there's another study way back talking about attractive people and stereotypes about them. And if someone is on the phone talking to someone they think is attractive, they're nicer to them, as opposed to talking to someone who's unattractive. They're less nice to that person they think is unattractive, even though it's actually the same person. They're just on the phone. Yeah. Okay. All of us going to town. Um, here's a little diagram talking about that study that we were just talking about, where the person is using different interviewing techniques to make people nervous. And yeah. Okay. Self-fulfilling prophecy and examples um, in real life. So when a teacher has beliefs about people's abilities, they treat people differently and people respond differently. And so if someone has the belief that people are able to learn equally despite whatever group they are a part of, those kids usually do learn pretty equally. Unfortunately, the reverse is true. And so if a teacher thinks that one group of people, based on skin color or religion or ethnicity or whatever it is less likely to do well, they probably will do less well. And that's been measured. They tend to not receive as much attention, and less in terms of explanation and support during their educational journey. So there you go. Social identity threat is again closely related to the self-fulfilling prophecy. Your book uses this term social identity threat. I call it stereotype threat. Both are correct. But social identity threat is the threat or anxiety um, when people are perceive that others are evaluating them based on that group membership instead of as an individual. So if I feel like I am being evaluated as a woman, um, or if I feel that I am being evaluated as, some white chick, or whatever, or as a overweight individual, you have this negative reaction, basically, that can cause some issues. Um, yeah. Social identity threat, stereotype threat can happen to any group of people, race, sexual orientation, religion, political affiliation, sports team, really? Okay. Hair color, yes, the blonde thing is occasionally an issue. Purple, if you choose that, maybe be judged on it. I love me some lavender hair, but whatever. Um, and you feel this need to like be the perfect example from your group to disprove this theory that you're somehow inferior. And it distracts you from whatever it is you're trying to do in the process. And so you do whatever you're trying to do less well, usually. Um, and they talk about how you can be part of more than one group. If that's the case, sometimes you can shift your identity from like I'm being judged as a woman to I am being judged as a woman who is highly educated, and then tap into the highly educated and overcome that threat that just happened. Um, but sometimes you're not capable of doing that. Um, in order to overcome when you do feel threatened like that, um, again, try to pick another group you belong in. And there's something called self-affirmation of like, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. Remind yourself of your good qualities. You can also say, this is what's happening now, and I just got to get over it and do it. So for some people, that's enough. But yeah, it's very well established that the social identity threat happens and it can reduce performance on whatever the job is at hand, whether that's an interview or taking a test. Your book gives an example of taking the GRE, which is the SAT for grad school, and reminding people that certain groups do less well on it than others, because people did less well. So yeah, take a look for a little more info. Causes of prejudice. What causes it? Oh, Lord. That's a good question. Um, I mean, it just happens growing up to a certain extent. Um, I'm going to pause here for just a second. I'll be right back. Back before you knew it. Okay, so where were we? Right. These are the three main theories that the book focuses on causes of prejudice. Um, one is a pressure to conform to social norms. Um, Social norms are informal rules on how you should behave within a society or group. Um, and oftentimes we do feel pressure to follow those norms. Sometimes we don't question the norms. So if there's a norm to be prejudiced, you are kind of following the leader on that one, even though you may not be 100% aware of it at the time. They go ahead and define several terms in here. One is institutional discrimination. And these are practices that discriminate legal or illegally against a minority group. It doesn't have to be a minority group. It can be a group, but usually minority, by virtue of whatever group. Um, Old Jim Crow in the South. Apartheidism in South Africa are institutional discrimination set by law. They do not have to be set by law, though, in order to be discrimination at an institutional level. Um, uh, yeah, we were talking about law enforcement earlier, um, and they, may not mean to, but there is discrimination kind of built in against African Americans in that system. Uh, so um, it's there. Um, there's other institutional discriminations around. I don't think you have to look too far to find something. Okay. So again, pressure to conform here, normative rules. That's just what you do. Um, and hopefully, like most people aren't being judgmental of people because they feel like they have to. Sometimes they don't realize that is a social norm that is happening and they're fitting into that pattern. But sometimes, yes, to fit in with whatever is considered normative with society. Um, mhm. This is kind of a rando example, but read up on it in there if you would like to. They don't place a lot of emphasis on that in the book. Anyhow, social identity theory is more of my favorite in terms of a cause of prejudice. Like to me, this is the beginning of everything. So social identity, basic definition is who are you in terms of a group membership? It's part of a person's self-concept that is based on their identification with a nation, religious or political group, occupation, or any other social affiliation. And when you are part of a group, you are part of what's called the in group. That's the group you're a part of. And then everyone else is part of the out group. And there are usually some specific out groups that you guys are concerned with as an in group. Um, Depending on what that is. If you're talking about a fraternity, sorority thing, like you're part of a fraternity and sometimes you have rivalries with other fraternities. Or if you're a big fan of a sports team, at my house down in Georgia, everyone's an Auburn fan. And so we have to hate Alabama and we have to hate Georgia. And those are the out groups there, which is stupid, but whatever. Um, okay. Um, we also tend to have ethnocentrism, which is the belief that our in group, in this case, our ethnicity or cultural identity, is better in some way. Um, it tends to be a universal trait. We tend to not think that, like, oh God, America sucks. Some people kind of think that, but there's something about America they're proud of. So whatever group you're talking about in terms of ethnicity, you tend to think it's not bad. We have this in-group bias. We tend to favor our own group, not always, but usually, and give them special preference over people from different groups. So if two people were coming in for a job and one was in my friend group and one was not, probably going to hire the friend. Um, the group can be temporary and trivial, or it can be very significant. Yeah, I'm not going to get into that one. In-group bias can lead to unfair treatment of the out-group. Um, we tend to see the out-group as homogenous. I think they're going to get into this, yep, right here. We tend to see the out-group as homogenous. Everyone is kind of alike in that other group. Like, oh my God, all those Alabama fans are uppity rednecks. Whereas we Auburn people are just out, honest, front redneck people. So we tend to see the out group as homogenous, and we tend to see the in group as being more individuals. So if we were going to stick with the Auburn, Alabama thing, it's like, oh my gosh, we have some Auburn people who are very unique individuals. They always love to claim Tim Cook from Apple, and we've got tech people, we've got people who do this and that, and it's this huge mix, a hodgepodge of people, but all the Alabama people are all alike. Um, so yeah, we stereotype the out group, and that can lead to prejudice and discrimination and attitudes toward them that are not nice. We tend to have positive attitudes toward the in group. We tend to see them more individually and judge them as individuals more so than people in the out group, and may have a stereotype, but it's a little bit more flexible. Okay. Um, mhm. This is basically a study on the Auburn, Alabama thing, but with Princeton and Rutgers. Um, This, I don't think really belongs in the chapter. They talk about blaming the victim. A lot of times we like to think that bad things don't happen to good people. And so if something bad happens to someone, they must have deserved that somehow. Um, and so we tend to judge them harshly, unless that person is part of the in group. Um, and we can empathize with them and see them as an individual. But they don't really talk about that aspect in terms of the in group thing. Um, yeah, we need to see the world as fair and just. Um, mhm, 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 all that stuff. Um, so in terms of our in group, we tend to uh, systematically kind of discriminate against everybody else. Give me just a second to click on an older slide. If I can find it real quickly. I haven't gotten to realistic conflict theory. That's kind of weird. Um, um, yeah. Um, Basically, this section tries to explain why people as part of a group feel entitled and superior. And again, it has to do with being part of the in group. They kind of sneak in the majority of people and minorities in here, but it doesn't have to be that. It can work in reverse as well. Um, Again, I think I'm just going to skip over this a little bit, but please feel free to read more about it in the book. Um, Using religion to justify prejudice. Oh Lord, religions, people have been so prejudiced against other religious groups forever. I mean, Catholicism, hello, Spanish Inquisition, Muslim versus Christians, and Christians versus Muslims, and then the poor Jewish people. But anyhow, all right. So the third theory in your book, in terms of where prejudice comes from, is called realistic conflict theory. I wanted to kind of skip ahead and make sure to get to this and have time to talk about it. Realistic conflict theory is the idea that there are limited resources in the world and everybody is fighting for their peace. And so, um, the conflict amongst groups to get whatever it is that we need creates prejudice, loathing, and so on and so forth. Um, this is the idea that there's only so much money or so much in terms of energy, natural gas, or petroleum, or so much food even in the world. And so it's yeah, you're in conflict with other individuals, but under other groups to have enough resources and maybe even more resources than you really need. Um, when it comes to the theory, they talk about politics and how sometimes governments can scapegoat a minority as being the root of all evil. And they are getting at those, I'm going to use a specific example, those jobs that are available in the United States. And that minority is probably going to be immigrants when we're talking about that. Um, and so there's only so many jobs and so much money available. And if this minority who can't really defend themselves gets in the way, they become a scapegoat. Um, Economic anxiety as well can fuel racism straight up, and perhaps more commonly anti-immigrant views. Um, Whenever times get tough, minorities get the short end of the stick. Um, Especially some minorities, those that can't really do much about it. So immigrants usually starts with them, and then it moves to perhaps other groups, Jewish people in World War II, for example. Um, yeah, when unemployment rises, you tend to get more racism out there, more acts of open, honest racism. Mhm. Um, the in-group members will feel more threatened by the out-group because the out-group is the competition. And you tend to see discrimination increase, prejudice increase, and straight up violence increase. Um, if you've been paying attention to the news, times are a little tough. We've seen anti-Semitism rise. We've seen racism increase. We've seen anti-immigration movements increase. And you could relate it back to this realistic conflict theory of where people are fighting for a limited resource. Um, mhm. I want to end the video here because reducing prejudice needs its own time. Just know these aren't the only theories when it comes to where does prejudice come from, how does it continue, that kind of thing. Realistic conflict theory can explain some of it. It doesn't necessarily mean that it is the truth when it comes to all prejudice. Um, it's the same thing with social identity theory, us versus them. Um, it can explain a lot, but it doesn't necessarily explain prejudice. And then the pressure to conform to what's normal doesn't really explain everything either. So they're all theories and they have pros and cons. I'm going to end it here and um, start a new one in just a minute. Bye for now.